people out there who are fans of the Christian masculinism. Today, Nicholas A. Stumphauser and myself will be discussing Santa Claus. And I released this online saying, look, it's December the 15th, 10 days till Christmas. It's really important that I debate Santa. I said this on my Twitter. And people, of course, this gave them the opportunity to respond. Well, I heard Santa's a good debater, and also he's a beard puller and a face puncher. So watch out. No, I'm debating about Santa with my good friend and colleague and every Friday CMAS co-host, Nicholas Stumphauser. What's up, Nick? We have to get to the bottom of this. And actually, there's going to be substantive parts to this. This will not be a hot debate, but there are substantive parts to this. Is it a lie? Oh, by the way, don't treat this like it's parental advisory, explicit content. Don't let your kids listen to this if you're on my side of things, which is to say, you are someone who's against ruining their childhood, and you do allow them to celebrate Santa. What's up?
What's up? Yeah, so this is going to be the first time I think we're on opposing sides of an issue. I think it's funny that it's like this issue. Like this is...
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous because we work together hand in glove on many, many things, and I very, very, very seldom disagree with even your snap judgment. We were just doing some business right now. I'm like, oh, that's good, that's good, that's good. And then we were talking last night, and we learned that we are on opposite ends of the Santa debate.
The great Santa debate.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so should we name our terms here, Lincoln Douglas? Like, the Santa debate, so people get your children out of the room, kick them out of the room or the car, not if your vehicle's moving. Just stop listening for 30 seconds and deposit them at any one of our nation's stellar public schools. They're just daycares. Just make sure you're not listening right now, because what comprises the Santa debate is this particular question. It's a lot of spillover from a certain kind of evangelical Protestant that used to be unheard of in the Catholic world. Now there's sufficient spillover to make it not unheard of in the Catholic world. Is telling your kids that Saint Nick is at least one of the four causes of usually their biggest Christmas gift. Is this a lie? Is this prevarication? Would you add anything to the terms of this debate, Mr. Stumphauser?
I would say also, does it do any harm to them spiritually or cognitively? Does it set them up for some kind of failure in the future? Does it engender resentment at all? And is it a lie? Does it cause any harm? I think those are the two main things. And then I would say also like the utility is a really interesting discussion as well. Like, do we need the whimsy? Do we need the Christmas cheer, the holiday spirit? Is there utility in that, or should we only have the one true myth of Christianity, where each Christmas should we only be talking about the nativity, sort of the trad cath perspective, where it's just sola scriptura, ironically enough.
So let's do it exactly like that. Is it a lie? Section 1. Section 2. What are the harms of a lie, or at the very least, how I'll characterize it? I think it's strong. Makes a strong, self-evident showing of mental reservation. What are the harms? And section 3, should this be even ideally an austere penitential season? I would think I'll open by saying this. I don't want to do jump to number 2 instead of doing number 1. But I will say from the outset that I am the far and away the most sympathetic to the view that if done incautiously, the boomers who love being a retrograde, don't leave my side because of this. You know, I'm generalizing with the broad brush, 99% of boomers. The boomer way of doing Santa Claus, I will say, carried many, many harms, and we can talk about this in the second section. So I'm most sympathetic to that dimension of this, and people that are on my side with Santa. I guess I'm not accustomed to being normie. I guess I'm on the normie side here of the Santa question. I think it's a good place to be on this one.
The SQ.
What?
The SQ. The
SQ. The SQ. This is we should have titled it that. The SQ.
No, we should
December
not
15th. You want to keep it on YouTube, so we'll call it the SQ.
The Santasm.
No, but I mean, like, normies will typically say, oh, don't be maudlin. Don't be melodramatic. What is this, an opera? You know, don't be grandiloquent. To the anti-Santies like yourself, who say, look, it could do real harm. And I'm actually like, no, it could be scarring. And me and Steph and many of our friends recall being very scarred. I learned in 4th grade the terrible truth. And so it's because it was done indelicately. But we'll save that till number 2, because before you could figure out what the remedy is, you must first ascertain that there is, in fact, a malady. You know, you got to say there's a breach here before you get to damages. Topical. And so let's just start out. Nick, is telling your kids that Santa has some causal role in gifting each Christmas a lie, strictly speaking, necessarily speaking?
Yes. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, would you care to develop that? Because it's not true.
Well, okay. Give me the 4 causes here. Which cause? The cause that the child believes is that Santa does indeed traverse the chimney across our great plain of earth, and in a magical sleigh distributes gifts predicated on the morality of the children. And each one of those things is factually untrue. What I think would be true to say is that in celebration of Nicholas of Myra, colloquially called Santa, Mom and Dad are giving you guys gifts because we love you a lot, and this is a time of celebration.
Sorry, we're doing this honestly because there's zero chance of us getting mad at each other or anything. Also, we'll do it colloquially. Yeah, like when... That sounds like such a stick in the mud. That sounds like, remember on The Simpsons, you probably don't. There's a Simpsons where where Bart and Lisa have to go stay with the Flanders, and they're goody two-shoes, and they do everything like the most boring stick in the mud possible way. And he's like, hey, Bart and Lisa, do you guys want nachos? And they're like, yay. And they're surprised because they do everything else super healthy and boring. And they're like, well, that's nachos Flanders style, which is cucumbers with cottage cheese. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like literally saying, hey, we have, Mom and Dad, me and Steph get the kids most of their presents. To say, well, this present is going to be extra fun. And you just sign this contract really quick. And you are hereby agreeing that we all acknowledge, beginning upon ratification of the contract, to embrace the Santa Clausiness of it, and we're doing this in the spirit of Santa. This doesn't conform with the idea of good cultural myths. See, like the Puritans don't understand good cultural myths.
Are there others though? Like, can you offer a few other cultural myths that, like, for example, I think the tooth fairy is utterly meaningless. It doesn't contribute to anything spiritual, unlike you could argue Santa does. And it seems oddly capitalistic, like just remove parts of your body to gain profits.
Well, they fall out naturally, to be fair.
For now, but sooner or later, some kid's gonna figure this out. Like, I've got $30 in my mouth.
I'm rolling.
But like, the Tooth Fairy is a cultural myth, and it's easily dispensed with. How is the Santa Claus story, the cultural myth of Santa Claus, any different?
Well, because it's valuable. I would still say, look, okay, so I don't know. We can develop the grave capitalist lie of Santa Claus more afterwards. This isn't your only bite of the apple, but yeah, let me respond with a kind of prelim statement. Cultural myths are good. Wearing a wedding ring is a cultural myth, right? It's a cultural myth to say this represents my wedding. There are very few cultural myths left because we live in America in a Protestant-Enlightenment society, both of which are reductionist and materialist. So they'll always say, like, that's not true. So it's remarkable how one of the few good standing cultural myths is wearing a wedding ring. It's still widespread practice. Well, it's because the ladies like gems.
It's also because you can't display the form of the sacrament publicly.
Some people do. There are all kinds of tapes on the internet that would gainsay that proposition. No, I mean, yeah, but well, there's a kind of, you're just saying there's a good justification for them.
Yeah, there's utility.
For this cultural myth.
That's more of like wearing a name tag. It's not really a myth. Like it's an indicator light on a dashboard for the public. There's no, I still have yet to see the utility of the Santa mythos. It doesn't bring people to Christianity, as evidenced by all the secular culture loving Santa and only Christians being like, yeah, also, by the way, it's the birth of Christ. Because like there's an obvious partition in like 99% of the religious people as well, where they're like, we believe in Santa and Jesus. And you're like, well, then what's the purpose of Santa? And they're like, well, we like presents. And so there's no sales funnel from Santa to Christ. So I don't really see the utility of it. Okay,
so that's my job here today. So first off, here's the utility. I would also say silly cultural myths like the Tooth Fairy are not immoral, qua cultural myth, and not a lie, strictly speaking, but are silly, and there's no utility.
Well, superstition.
Santa Claus,
which is
Santa
immoral.
Claus. What's
that?
It
is superstition, which is immoral.
Oh, wow. We're using the S word. This is very, very, this is very Calvinist, because you're begging the question anytime you hurl the S word at someone. If you're like, yo, that's a superstition, that means you're presuming what you set out to prove, which is the fact that there is no truth here. And rather than demonstrating there's no truth here, Santa Claus or the saints or, worshiping relics of the saints, venerating relics of the saints, rather, that there's no truth here, you just call them the S word. That's my job right now to show you. So first off, everyone can check New Advent, Catholic Encyclopedia. St. Augustine, St. Thomas were both truthers insofar as they were strict liability truth tellers. They're saying it's always wrong to tell a lie. Both of them, go check it at New Advent under something called the mental reservation, doctrine of wide mental reservation, is not a lie, doesn't count, even though both Augustine, Aquinas, really all the good moral theologians are like, you can never tell a lie. Let me see. I believe, as at present advised, that when one is asked by murderers bent on taking the life of someone hiding in his house, whether he is in sin, no answer should be given. And if this betrays him, his death will be imputable to the murderers, not to the other silence. Or he may use an equivocal expression, which is at the heart of the Santa
you Jesuit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is Saint Augustine. He's no casuist. Equivocal expression and say he is not at home or something like that. And this can be defended by a number of instances found in the Old Testament. So he might say he's not at home. Or he may, which would be to say, well, are you hiding out like whatever, like
Mormons and
I
your
don't want to say
floorboards?
Anne Frank, because that just takes out the fun, right? This sucks all the funny out of the room. But like, say someone you're hiding out that murderers have come to get.
Yeah.
And just say Annie Frankenstein. Okay. You're hiding someone out. You don't want bad guys to get whomever. And you say, Annie is not at home.
Right.
You're saying Annie's not at her home. She's really at your home. And you just spoke something true with the intent of lying. Remember, to be guilty of something, you have to have a grave actus reus, bad act in itself, and a culpable mens rea. All you have is your intent is to deceive, culpable mens rea, but there's no actus reus because what you said is true. Something like that. And this can be defended.
It's true subject to interpretation and context, right? So like you ask your son, hey, did you brush your teeth? And he says, yes, I have brushed my teeth. And in his mind, he's thinking, in my lifetime, I have done this task. And you're like, yeah, but I was asking you like right now, and you knew that that's what I was asking you. And so like you deceived me, son.
Right. Which is why the conditions for the possibility of using a mental reservation are closely governed. It is not open to kids with their parents. You know, did you brush your teeth this morning? And the kid says, yes, I brushed my teeth. That's a lie. That's breaching the gap. Also, as a matter of subject matter jurisdiction, you're not supposed to use it there. You're supposed to use it with something where, you know, the one would be tempted to utter, just go ahead and white lie. It should be, some good should come of it. So the fact of the matter is that if we apply all this to Santa Claus, the mental reservation, out of the fashion of St. Augustine, what we do, what we try to do in our house is, because it's an abiding cultural myth of value, which we can discuss into the values of it, the potential harms of it. But it's a Christian cultural myth that's widespread. St. Nicholas of Myra is an absolute Chad of the early church, one of the first Chads of the church above ground after the Edict of Milan, right? As soon as Christianity becomes legal in like the 317, 8 years later, you have Council of Nicaea. St. Nick is one of the heroes defending Jesus against Arian heretics at the council. He's amazing. He's also the wonder worker. So he really does have the abilities to do what he claimed. So it means motive opportunity. He was a wonder worker. He was known for bilocating, so he could be in multiple places at once. That's just, again, you just call out BS here, you start sounding like Dawkins or something like that, Hitchens. He has means, motive, and opportunity to do this. He is a saint, a canonized saint. He's still alive. He was the patron saint of children. He is known, I should say, for surprise giving of gifts to children, 3 pieces of gold to 3 little daughters with a poor father who had no dowry. So he has means, motive, and opportunity to any Christmas Eve make some miracle happen. Now, the efficient causation of the Saint Nick gifting in my household has not been Saint Nick himself, even though it's possible, right? There's an abiding cultural myth that he's the one that does this, and instead, the more important formal cause and final cause of the gifting is definitely outside myself. I'm giving you this gift on behalf of Saint Nick. Now I say, if you're careful and you use Christmas films, the NORAD Santa tracker, your children's friends, right? Then literally you watch Elf, you watch Fred Claus, you watch these movies which tell the cultural myth for you, which is what good movies do. And you can neither affirm nor deny the efficiently causal reality of Santa, which is what we try not to do, right? They'll say, I can give you a gift with a mental reservation, be like, this is from Santa. This is from Nick, but I gave you the gift. Like Steve Harrington gives Jonathan the gift through Nancy at the end of Stranger Things season 1. It's very touching. Very, very common practice. So you give a gift from Santa, you blur the how directly it's from him, and then kids will ask you stuff like, "Oh, I got this gift from Santa. Did you guys see him?" Like, no. When you have kids, they start being like, "I heard something last night." You're like, "Oh, I didn't hear it. Do you think that was Santa?" Like, yeah. This is a reality. This is how it works. And you showed them 20 Christmas films, all affirm there really was a real Santa, and he is real, and he is alive, and he is the patron saint of children, and you teach your kids all this. How do you think he gets to all the homes in one night? One of the twins was asking me last night. Well, I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but here's one fact, and I read to her from a St. Nick page. He can bilocate, and bright kids will be like, well, this is how they do it. And you're like, this is how it would be done. Yes.
Okay. All right. I don't know what.
No lies.
I don't know what part of an official debate this would be. Would this be my response to your opening remarks or something? So, superstition is defined by the Catholic Church as the deviation of religious feeling and practices that attribute importance, often in a magical way, to certain otherwise lawful or necessary practices. It is a departure from the worship of the true God and can manifest in idolatry, divination, and magic. The sin of superstition is committed by those who firmly believe in religious or other practices that are either forbidden or useless. I propose to you that the Santa myth is useless and a far cry, a meaningful perversion of the historical account of Nicholas of Myra in such a way that the only thing that you are doing to a child that you actively convince through omission or commission or equivocation of the existence of the jolly bearded fellow is setting them up for a moment where they realize that the moral and theological authorities in their life conspired to fool them, to make of them a fool, to make them believe an aspect of reality that is untrue. Because whether or not you ever said a lie, there was effort exerted to make them believe something that was clearly and genuinely distinct from reality itself. And that moment, that watershed moment, can go one of two ways. It can be positive, like, oh, I just figured out a magic trick. Like, I'm so clever. That's cool. And immediately a lot of kids, when they figure out a magic trick, they want to start learning magic. This is what I did. And now I'm a professional magician of 17 years.
You get the irony, right, with what you're just saying about superstition. Yeah.
No. I can defend that in a moment. Or in that moment, it can be the seeds of what I would argue are the seeds of atheism. So I'm curious if you could defend for me the actual utility of the Santa mythos as it's practiced. We'll say not by abusive boomers or the secularists, but by well-meaning Christians and Catholics. What is the utility of the Santa Claus, of showing kids Elf, of the presents appearing and the cookies on the table and all that?
So you're asking what is the utility of the veneration of the cultus of saints?
No,
is what I'm hearing.
No,
because this is the second millennial cultus of Saint Nicholas. He's a first millennium saint. died with miracles associated to him. He had like myrrh or something seeping from his grave. Canonized saint, and the red pajama overweight version, reemergence of Saint Nick, is about 1,000 years old, give or take. So you're saying there's a cultus, which is one of the checks for this particular saint, that sprang up around him. It's a grassroots thing. This is literally what the church checks for when they're seeking to canonize the saint, beatification moving to canonization. Is there a cultus around him? Did grimy fingernailed peasants start making shit up about this guy? That's the way that a deterministic, rationalistic, materialistic approach would characterize it. Like, did grimy fingered peasants start saying, and I'm not saying that that the miracles that he did during his natural life, St. Nicholas, were just the mythos of grimy-fingered peasants. No, they were real. I believe that materially and efficiently they were real. But the church always looks for a cultus that springs up with culture. What that means is cultural myths about this guy that are difficult to ascertain whether or not they're true. I didn't witness St. Nicholas of Myra or St. Francis or Padre Pio bilocating. It's a tall order.
Okay, but what's the utility?
It's a tall order.
Of your children
but
believing.
Utility is something that only a consequentialist asks about first. I'm just talking about principle first.
Well, but
and then we can get to utility. I'm just saying, in principle, a Roman Catholic saint, or I think even a saint in the Orthodox tradition, has a cult that springs up around him even before he's canonized. And this is a legitimate part of the grassroots Catholic cultus of St. Nicholas of Myra. It can't be separated. And they're like, well, he's now a commercial red-suited pimp daddy.
It totally, because, okay, picture this.
Well, I disagree, because I teach my kids about St. Nicholas, and it makes they're interested to do so.
Yes, but if the Christmas Yuletide scheme was truly the cultus of St. Nick, what you would see is not Toyotathon events and JCPenney sales. You also wouldn't see NORAD trackers and such. What you would see is people trying their hardest to delight their friends and loved ones and family members with gifts in a way that they were not able to track, right? The spirit would be like a reverse pickpocketing, which is what St. Nick did, right? He was able to deliver gifts miraculously and under cover of mystery. So if the Christmas scheme, St. Nicholas cult, was your goal is to lightheartedly give gifts in ways that nobody could ever catch you doing, and it didn't say who it was from or anything like that, that would be very much in the spirit of St. Nick. That's just not what Santa is, even remotely. And the reason why utility matters is there's no sales funnel to the truth. And as I just read from the Catechism, if it's useless, that qualifies as it being the sin of superstition. So I still don't know the utility of talking about Santa in the way that we currently do in modern times. It's completely distinct from the history of St. Nick.
Well, the utility route's a bad route to go, because I say literally, we did a lesson on St. Nick 3 days ago in homeschool, and the kids were 10 times more interested because I said, look, this is St. Nick, this is the real Santa Claus. They were all bought in. Utility right there. As for me and my household, utility is not the way that a pro or a con want to debate anything, because it yields consequentialism and people just say, there is definitely possible utility. There were several other elements in superstition where I was raising my finger, where you're like, okay, you can reread it. There are two sentences where I'm like, well, this definitely busts the application of superstition to St. Nick, because it has never been proscribed. There's long-standing Catholic cultural practice to do Saint Nick across cultures as a celebration. I think what's confusing the anti-Santies is the fact that there is like cultural divergence. Like in some cultures, he appears slightly different, multifariously across different cultures, but there are common threads. Also, what I think confuses is like you're saying St. Nicholas of Myra was said to have thrown a piece of gold through the window for a poor man with 3 daughters for their dowries 3 nights in a row. One thing, I don't know that that's true. That could be dirty fingernailed peasantry making stuff up about a real saint, but I choose to believe it. The myth that Saint Nick punched or slapped, I prefer it punched. Slapping's not that cool, or pulled the beard of Arius at the Council of Nicaea first appeared in like 1200. That one I choose to believe, right? And we're going to deal with what's all this choose to believe business. Couldn't this become harmful? In number 2, that's where I would hedge and sound a little more like you. But there's a way to do so from my perspective, and while affirming that this isn't a lie. But it is not a superstition. This is factually part of the cultus of a saint, and the fact that Saint Nick he earns his attribution, and we're going out of our way to say this gift is from Saint Nick. Yes, that diverges from the original Nicholas allegedly throwing gold through a poor man's window, and he didn't receive his attribution. That's not enough divergence to say this is not part of the cultus of Saint Nicholas. It's just not by a long shot, or just that's a fail.
I don't see the. I don't want to use the word utility again, but the reason for doing it in that, look, it's magical as a kid from age 0 to 10 to live in this world. It's really, really exciting. There was like a solid 8 Christmases where I wasn't sleeping more than a few hours, and then waking up at 7 o'clock sharp and running down the halls, making sure my parents and sister were up. That's really amazing. But it's undone by the moment that you find out that your sister and your parents are deceiving you, knowingly and intentionally, because now you are a fool, because you couldn't apprehend reality. And that there wouldn't be that moment of realization if it wasn't, if you weren't being made a fool, if you weren't being deceived. And it's not like, for example, when you buy a dog, a little pupperoonie, and you've got 10 to 15 years with this animal. And so you get your kid a dog when they're age 4, which is when I got my dog. You get your kid the dog, and you know that around age 17, that dog's going to die, and it's going to absolutely obliterate your child, which is what happened to me. My dog of 13 years died when I was 17. I took her to the vet to get euthanized. It was horribly tragic. 100 times out of 100, you still say it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Like, there's utility, there's meaning, there's purpose in owning an animal. Same thing with like the whole pro-life argument, right? Okay, the child might be horribly disfigured or something like that. Doesn't matter. You have the kid. I just can't see any similar reasoning, and I think the utility argument does matter, because when you talked about the equivocations that are integral and the mental reservations that are integral to the Santa mythos, the example that you gave is like, well, there needs to be some good to come out of it. For example, with the Anne Frankenstein thing, where, all right, you equivocated, but it was to save the life of this girl. All right, well, you used mental reservations and equivocation to produce the Santa mythos. What did you gain out of it? And I think that the risk of the child having the seeds of atheism planted deep in their heart is way greater than any like magical experience, when you could just as easily get that without lying to your kid.
Well, I never said that this isn't a prudential judgment that I guess has spilled over from American sort of Calvinist Protestantism now into the pop culture of American Catholic culture. It is absolutely a phronetical, prudential, discretionary judgment that ought to be exercised by the parents of each household, the father of each household, and no one else. Absolutely. I'm responding to gainsayers, right, the anti-Santis, who say that this is not a prudential issue, that this is an issue of clear grave matter. It's a malum in se, a necessary evil, in the same way that lying is. And I know so because they say this is often, I was just reading a bunch of them on Twitter, this is the mortal sin of lying. This is grave lying. No, it's not lying at all if you do it the proper way. And I just demonstrated how you can have basically full buy-in with your young kids without ever fully lying to them. And revealing the method later is really important. I just went through this with my 12-year-old, who we told last year after Christmas when she was 11. And this year, she literally just said this to me yesterday. She's like, it's surprising. Now I kind of help you guys a little bit plan the gifts with the younger kids. And it's barely less fun. Like everything else, we took the hemorrhaging trauma, Steph and I, from, I'm sorry to say it, but the boomer way of doing things, the actual outright lying about Santa that we suffered. And we made the appropriate modifications, and we only have one. Abby plus Maggie are now of age where they would know. And it's really only Maggie we talked to about it. And she's like, no, this is very untraumatic. She was saying to me yesterday, I'm surprised how much fun Christmas still is now that I kind of help you guys plan the Santa gifts. And I would say this final thought. Nietzsche says one shouldn't become a monster to fight monsters. I don't want to become boomerish in order to fight the boomer approach to the world, but I would say this very boomerish thing. Boomers they have like their 1.7 kids, and they'll be like, you'll know when you're a parent, as if they're like parenting's the center of their life, with like 1.8 children per household. No, but okay. And I wish I had more kids, but I have 7 kids. It's genuine. This is very boomerish, but I'm just saying it's genuinely hard as a young, or as any person, young or not young, who doesn't have kids, to know the practicable divergences in life accoutrements between a 5-year-old and say a 9-year-old until you have kids. And what came up when we were talking about this on the phone the other day is a 5-year-old will go for all this hook, line, and sinker. Like, you don't have to lie hard. They don't ask probative questions. They're not investigating. They don't really care. If I told them SpongeBob SquarePants, if I insinuated he's real, they'd be like, okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Stands to reason. So you don't have to get in the mud so much with a 5-year-old. Now, if you have a shrewd 9-year-old, and with some kids it's 8, with some it's 10, with some it's 11. If you have a shrewd 8 or 9 or 10-year-old who starts asking questions, this is where I would shift to your side. And I would strongly say, as we go into, okay, how do we mitigate harms or avoid harms altogether of using, not the lie, but the mental reservation of the cultural myth of Santa Claus? I would say it is important, because 8-year-olds, if they're bright, do start asking questions that no 5-year-old, however bright, asks. And there, at 8, 9, 10, when I started suspecting, that's when, in my childhood, I mean, I had a good childhood, but, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm on my therapist's couch later, but yeah, the boomers had no problem being like, well, sometimes you lie to your kids, and just double down, triple down, quadruple down on Santa. It's like, bro, I mean, I'm not saying anything specific about my parents, but it's kind of like, I ask you this and you quadruple down. Like, no, I promise he's real. That's not cool, right? So you let go gently, organically of the myth when they start asking you more direct cross-examinational questions that would require a lie to defend. What you have to understand is a 5-year-old does not ask questions that require you to do anything more aggressive by way of defending the cultural myth than simple mental reservation. Show them a movie or some elf film or whatever. Hey, this is a NORAD Santa tracker. NORAD says Santa's over Cleveland now, and you show them, and they're like, this is totally real. Now, all I said is NORAD said it, right? I'm reporting truly, not falsely. And, hey, someone ate these cookies or nibbled these carrots last night. Was that a reindeer or Santa Claus breaking and entering last night?
But if they ask you that and you respond with, I don't know, it's like, that's a lie. And you can't.
Yeah. So this is why it's crafting the mental reservation is an art in the Platonic sense. Like you literally have to, in order to do it correctly. It's also it's a jocund lie, right? Which is actually, if it's a lie, it would be jocund. So it wouldn't be even a venial sin, or the like slightest venial sin. Look at the 3 types of lies, but. So yes, there's a mild risk of slipping between mental reservation and jocund lie, but you're not accountable in some grave way. And the point is, at 8, 9, 10, absolutely, once you start getting hard questions from really young adults, any kid that's made his first communion is capable of being sent to hell. So they're really young adults in my view. In the Catholic view, a young adult begins on the day of first confession, first communion. They're brighter. They're infinitely brighter and more probative than a 5-year-old. And this is where I do jump on board, where I'm like, yeah, okay, let me tell you about this.
But that gradation to me implies that, or reveals that it is deception. It's just a weak deception that only works on the incredibly credulous and stops working on the shrewd. And so isn't it our response? I don't understand how it's any different from saying sometimes you lie to your kids to craft these things such that your young child believes them, but your older child will not believe them. It just works on a younger child.
All this evidence is you don't believe in St. Augustine and St. Thomas's teachings on mental reservation. Like that's really all that's coming through, is you believe essentially, doesn't matter if the church has it on New Evan or any anti-Santis, not just you. You don't believe in the reality of mental reservations, which is a kind of outlet
Can you define that? Because I don't know that we ever did that.
Yeah, I started reading. So sometimes I'm on New Advent, and sometimes New Advent is guilty of definitions by example, which are the weakest sort of definition. The closest thing they give to a quiddity for it is the name applied to a doctrine which has grown out of the common Catholic teaching about lying, and which is its complement with an E. That's kind of a definition, but it says, according to common Catholic teaching, it is never allowable to lie, not even to save a human life. A lie is something intrinsically evil, and as evil may not be done, that good may come of it, we are never allowed to tell a lie. And this is my belief. Stronghold. This is St. Thomas's belief. This is Augustine's belief. However, we are also under an obligation to keep secrets faithfully, guard the cultural myth of the cult of Santa. One of the few Catholic, I've defined it as one of the few, like with a wedding ring, one of the few Catholic truths to still stand at the level of popular culture in Western civilization, which the church built. Sometimes the easiest way of fulfilling that duty is to say what is false, or to tell to tell a lie, but they're not saying that's okay. Writers of all creeds and of none, both ancient and modern, have frankly accepted this position. They admit the doctrine of the lie of necessity, and maintain that when there is a conflict between justice and veracity, it is justice that should prevail. This is not Augustine's position. The common Catholic teaching has formulated the theory of mental reservation as a means by which the claims of both justice and veracity can be satisfied. So it's not the best definition, but Saint Raymond of Pennafort, who was a Chad, is the one that said in his Summa, he quotes the saying of Saint Augustine that a man must not slay his own soul by lying in order to preserve the life of another, and that it would be most perilous doctrine to admit that we may do a less evil to prevent another doing a greater. As most doctors teach this, he says, though he allows that others teach that a lie should be told when a man's life is at stake. That this would be wide mental reservation. But he admits that Augustine has some ground. It's not tightly constricted, some ground for the narrower mental reservation. And I don't have that up, but I've seen lots on it. So it is not a misnomer to say Augustine has it. So this would be a narrow mental reservation. If you're following these rules strictly, and I'm not saying I always have. Sometimes I've definitely slipped over to the jocund lie in defense of this before I'd thought about it as much with some of the other kids, which produces, if you want to say a final word on is it a lie, I just haven't lied to any of the younger kids in my household. I haven't. But ironically, it produces the paradox that as we move into the what are the harms section, I only have one kid I reason with about this. And like I say, Maggie's one of the older ones where I was less scrupulous about not lying and just keeping my speech restricted to mental reservation. And she is like, yeah, she had nothing like the experience that I had as in fourth grade when I learned about Santa Claus. Because even though I'd started the process probably wrong when she was younger, I had thought about it more and was more scrupulous by the time last year we told her. And I made sure to say, feel free to approach anything you want in the first is it a lie section, or to put the cap on, but I made sure to say, look, here's the story of what happened to me, Maggie. In fourth grade, I got the sex talk and the Santa's not real revelation within a couple weeks of each other. And in fourth grade's too young, I think, for both of those, but especially the sex talk. And I was already struggling with low-key agnosticism. My dad had just come into the church, and I was like, I don't know if I believe any of this. Catholic school was doing its work in the 80s. And I didn't have anyone to go to. And I literally started applying, maybe the cultural myth. You know, J.R.R. Tolkien says Christianity is the one true cultural myth. Was as mythical as the red pajamas of Santa Claus, or the efficient causation of it. And I didn't have anyone to tell me not. But last year when I told my one daughter who definitely knows, I just said, look, I'm contrasting this from my experience. This is not what I swear to you, this is not the same deal with the empty tomb of Christ, with any of the miracles of Christ. They are absolutely historically real. Like I would bet my life on that. Santa, I started guarding more carefully with you, and I'm definitely doing it with your younger brothers and sisters. I'm only, I'm easing up as you guys are figuring it out. And she said, okay, well, that doesn't, no harm done,
Maybe, hopefully. And I'll put a cap on the is it a lie thing as a segue into the final third of this here, which is you may not have lied to your children, but they were deceived. And the Santa mythos is that in the best case scenario, the parent doesn't lie, but the child is deceived. And
is it deceived to be lied to? Or isn't that just a distinction without a difference?
Perhaps. Like this kind of my point is that a deception was created, whether or not it was via a lie. That seems to be what you're. There seems to be an argument to be made that yes, you did not tell a lie, but deception was engendered in the child, and that sets them up for a moment where something really scary can occur, because you had to say, I swear the other stuff about Christ and theology and the miracles are true. Please believe me. Trust me. Yes, I know that I just pulled the wool over your eyes for 8 or 10 years. But the stuff that really matters that actually matters, I swear to you, I'm not lying about that. And then the kid is going to start doing the mental calculus and going, okay, well, how do I know he's telling the truth? Because first of all, he lied about this. Second of all, let's look at his actions. Well, mom and him really, did put together this whole thing. They're lying to my other siblings actively. They're putting on a show every year. Hell, they even baked cookies and put them on the countertop. Like, is the baking cookies and putting them on the countertop the same as us going to mass? Am I going to hit 20 years old and suddenly I'm going to realize Christianity's not true, but it's really good to like raise kids in Christianity because then they behave well. And at some point I'm going to have to decide to lie to my kids about Christianity. And it might sound like I've got a runaway train here, but this is extremely real. And like any perspicacious child is going to start doing a one-to-one comparison of the commitment to this deception of Santa and how very similar and meaningful the unprovable non-physical claims of Christianity are. Like, you go and you witness the consecration, and because it's veiled, right, the essence changed but the accidents don't. It's like, wait a second, that reminds me of them saying, well, like, yeah, Saint Nick exists and like he may have been the one to put the presents under the tree, I don't know, I didn't see it. And then you come to find out, oh, that was mom and dad. It's like, okay, is all these people in here just thinking like this is a good cultural thing to do? And to me, that's just a worthless risk to take. No utility, no good upside to that kind of risk.
A couple things. One, I said all along, you unlike the Catholic tradition, I think you representing any anti-Santis just don't accept that there is a strict mental reservation. I'll send you this new Advent. We should have done this before and just be like, okay, the Catholic teaching is there is such a thing as a mental reservation. Strict, no lies, have it. So that's because you're essentially just saying there's no distinction between a mental reservation and a lie.
I just don't understand it. Like, I haven't heard you explain mental reservation enough to go like, oh, okay, it's not a lie. That's fine.
Well, you have to have for any sin, you have to have an actus reus, something that's the actual wrong part, formal essential part of the act that is grave. And then you have to have a certain frame of mind whereby you intended to do it, a culpable mens rea. If you have, I've explained this even, I think you and I were talking about what Catholics call NFP, which is not, it's not a thing. They'll say, what is your view on NFP, Tim? I'm like, okay, my view on moral acts as a Thomist, as an action theorist, is for an act to be wrong, you have to have a wrong actus reus, and you have to have a culpable mens rea. Before we're even talking about the thing, if someone carefully crafts language with what you'd call a deceptive intent, it can't be a lie unless they actually say something untrue. That would be the actus reus. All a mental reservation is where you never say anything untrue, and you are intending. You might have a culpable mens rea, but with no actus reus to attach it to, there's no sin there. There's no lie there. So
how does that work if that's air gapped such that you're like, I intend to produce in my child a belief about the world that is not actual, and my child then believes something about the world that is not actual, but despite me being the cause of that, I never actually told a lie. How is that possible, like, causally?
That's just how moral philosophy works. People will say the same thing about, I'll hit you with, before the 17th century, which was the golden era of moral theology, you had guys like St. Alphonsus Liguori, who thought it was a mortal sin to have sex with your wife when she was pregnant, or when she was on her cycle, or any time when she's not perfectly fertile. They're applying the exact same. It's very like Manichaean reasoning, body hatred reasoning, where it's like, look, your intent here cannot be procreation. And you're like, the Catholic response, starting in the 1600s, is really like, you have to have an actus reus. There's no such thing as a culpable mens rea by itself. So literally, if every sexual act between a husband and a wife, and it's good because kids are out of the room listening to this for the listener anyway, not listening to this for the listener, then if it's unitive, procreative, and in the context of marriage, every sexual act is licit, even if you're like, oh, we're doing the marital act while my wife is already pregnant. She can't get pregnant again. Well, St. Alphonsus Liguori said this is mortally sinful. And many other more ancient Catholic theologians, they hadn't conceived yet, and they're not the magisterium, right? These are just the private theologians of the church beforehand, hadn't yet conceived before. It's one good thing that came from modernity, non-modernistic, more technical, more bootstrapped moral theology, where it's like you have to have the frame of mind and the wrong act. You can't have the wrong act without the frame of mind, right? Like setting foot in a bear trap and not knowing it. That's not suicide. You didn't know it. That's not a sin. That's not the sin of suicide if it kills you. Well, same thing. You can't have a sort of what you might describe as a deceitful or a mischievous or a naughty frame of mind that could be imagined to be attached to some actus reus that's grave matter, but isn't. There's no such thing. You can't have one without the other. And so when you're not speaking lies, even if you'd say, well, this is usually the epistemology that would co-attend such lies, it doesn't matter as long as you make sure you don't speak the lie. I'm just trying to tell you what mental reservation is. Right. This is long-standing. It's at law. This language is used in the common law coming out of England, which comes from before Magna Carta, when England was still not arch-heretical the way it became. So all of this is very Catholic in both lawfare and Catholic moral theology. You have to have a wrong act and a wrong approach to it. It can't be wrong if it's just a mischievous act. Well, you had sex with your wife while she was pregnant. You can't have been hoping for a baby. Well, yeah, hoping for a baby is not the requirement to have sex with your wife as a Catholic. The requirement is that it's open to life and that it's unitive, finished in such a way that it is, you have a union, and it has to be within the context of marriage. We don't need to add rules. And so I think what people do is they look at this and they're like, isn't this casuistry? Aren't you trying to figure out what's wrong and what's right? And you're like, yeah, trying to figure out what's wrong and what's right. They're like, yeah, but you're trying to stay on the side of what's right, but get close to the borderline. Yeah, of course. We want to do as much as God permits us to do. And people look at that and they think that that's sophistry or casuistry, where you're trying to make the wrong thing right. And it's like, no, I would never want to do that, because you can't trick God. I just want to, there are times where we need to operate close to the borderline between wrong and right. And as long as we can definitely demonstrate that we're still on this side of the border, then it's fine. It's fine to at times be closer to it.
So I'm not a Manichaean, and I agree with, first of all, thank you for explaining the mens rea more, because in the mental reservation, that actually makes sense. But it seems like Christ would disagree, because he says that if you even look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery with her.
That's an act, though.
But if you even hate your brother, or if you have hatred in your heart, you've murdered him.
That's an act also.
Hatred and lust are an act as well, but what about deception? Are you saying that deception is not something that can exist, that you can spend all day thinking, how do I screw people? Like, how do I set up deals? How do I write this contract that it screws this person? But if you never send that contract, you're not sinning.
Well, no, the analogy. So this is really important. It came up when Dennis Prager went on Matt Fradd. Remember
that was
that?
the other thing I was going to bring up.
Okay, so Augustine's very specific about this. There are two types of acts. There are, like, he calls them vocal acts and mental acts or actual acts. And for what Jesus's stipulation to the people of the Old Testament is, don't look at a woman, because looking at the woman lustfully, it's an action. You're using your eyeballs. You're actually committing an action, and you are becoming aroused through this action, and the rational will is involved. The intellect is fully engaged. This is in every sense an act. For Augustine, for Thomas, for the more nuanced post-17th century moral theologians, everyone agrees that's an act. All Dennis Prager was saying is that for people that still follow the Old Testament only, they're on that outmoded, clearly wrong, though he wasn't admitting it, approach to what constitutes an act. He's like, because he said, we're only talking about acts. And Matt Fradd was like, but that is an act. And he's like, well, I know, but I only mean certain kinds of acts are proscribed. And we're like, precisely, this is the heart of the difference. You're just saying the act of, like, intercourse with someone besides your wife or another man's wife is proscribed, but not the act of looking. And Prager was like, yeah. And then I forget exactly what Fradd said, but what Fradd should have said is, so you're not distinguishing between acts and thoughts. You're distinguishing between two kinds of acts. You're saying some are licit, some wrong acts are licit, some wrong acts are not licit. And that doesn't make sense. To engage in certain thoughts is an act. To engage in other thoughts, to engage in the epistemology, which co-attends the sort of mental reservation we're talking about, the church has been very clear. This is not a wrong act.
So it's still in. Can you plot to rob a bank for 6 months and that not be a sin?
Yeah. Well, it depends what you meant. This is a really good question, and you have to get into the real mechanics of action theory to answer it. And you will learn, as the new natural law theorists like John Finnis, Germain Grisset, Boyle, these guys have learned, wow, something can look exactly. These guys are like, wait, hysterectomy with a live baby involved, which is an indirect abortion, which is licit if it's to save a mother's life. A hysterectomy with a live baby inside is, by no one's account, even Aquinas's, a direct abortion, and therefore it's not prescribed. But a craniotomy is the famous case, the new natural law theorists say, crushing the fetus's skull to get it out of the womb. Well, that's proscribed. This is the debate that's always had at the level of action theory between true natural law theorists, true Thomists, and the new natural law theorists, like Finnis and Grisset and all them. And it's a very clear distinction once you do the math. But at the outset, I will admit, craniotomy seems like a live hysterectomy, and it's hard to distinguish them unless you get into the calculus of Thomistic action theory and you really prove the case. So it's hard to do in a podcast form with non-academic philosophers. But all I can say is this: if your intent was strictly hypothetical, and you never intended to bring this action to fruition, but you were like you worked with defense companies or something, how could I rob this bank? Then that would be non-sinful. There is a way that it would be non-sinful. You're like, I just want to know if I could beat the system. Could I pull this crime off? Particularly if you're trying to help a defense contracting company or something like that, like the Italian Job, or the character at the beginning of the Italian Job. Yeah, if you intended to do it, then no, you would be engaging in sin. It's very technical.
Okay. Well, what about then if you're intending to do it, then it seems like it's that maps perfectly onto the Santa thing, because if you're intending that your child believes in Santa, and even though you're never robbing the bank, you're never telling a lie, and then your child believes in Santa, and you spent that whole time just intending that they believe in Santa, that's like you're trying to deceive them and they became deceived, then that's sinful, is it not?
You're intending with the Santa mental reservation language, which I am admitting here I did not use as rigorously with my younger kids, but one of them's turned out fine. You're intending to foster the cultus of Saint Nick, and you're intending to do so in a way that is concomitant with cultural Santa, which is the closest thing we have to any widespread cultus of any Catholic saint now. I don't think there's any more ubiquitous one in Western culture, particularly American culture. You're intending to work with it, cooperate with it, and if you do things the way I'm suggesting, Catholic dads out there, then you teach them about the real Saint Nick and generate interest in the real Saint Nick. Generate interest. This is the way, because I'm going to give my kids my church history course, which is basically on the ecumenical councils, and they're all quite young still. But I introduced the other day in homeschool, this is what an ecumenical council is. We had the Trinity drawing up there. This is who Arius was. Here were the guys who opposed him. Saint Nick was one of the 4 or 5 opponents of Arius. This is the real guy. We know the year he was born. We know the day he died, December the 6th, which is my son's birthday, and the feast day of Saint Nick. And here's why many believe that he goes around from house to house and gives gifts. He's the patron saint of kids. So they're interested. It's a way of engaging them. So right there's your utility. Now, you can't do wrong to achieve a good. So you can't strictly lie. But what I'm trying to do is use true language and nothing but true language to foster the cultural myth of St. Nicholas the way it appears in current American life, with foibles and all. And that's what I've set out to do, and so far it's worked well. That's a duplicitous intent. I get what you're saying, but no, it's just we're trying to highlight Saint Nick as the formal cause of great Christian things, and we're kind of surrogating material efficient cause for it, and that's the most duplicitous part. But there's no actus reus which goes along with it.
Well, my computer is at 5%, so I say we land this plane with some brief closing statements and wish our listeners a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, some of whom might freak out that we're saying Merry Christmas before the end of Advent, which I think is the perfect segue to section 3. This is a penitential season, isn't it? Well, yeah. Gaudete Sunday, which means joyful Sunday, is in 2 days. So it's not penitential in the same way that Lent is. It is. There's a pink candle specifically to remind us that it's a different kind of penitent Advent. And that's why putting up St. Nicholas decorations on St. Nick's Day, which is at the beginning of Lent, is not a mortal sin. That's why it's understandable, because Advent, unlike Lent, is a strong mixture of pink and purple. It's not just purple. If you wait for all of Advent to begin celebrating Christmas and or St. Nick, those of you who do it, then you will not have much of a Christmas season at all. So there is I think you're with me on this, a really fertile ground for mixing in some Gaudete with Advent. And guess what? The church is too. I don't think we disagree on that, right, Nick?
No.
St. Nick.
No.
Yeah. But I do want to address, by way of saying, look, the austerity mavens in the church, a growing movement, especially those applying it to St. Nick like a lot of Protestants did in the 90s. Virtually no Catholics I knew growing up with did. The austerity mavens, I do think there's a strong, strong hint of Manichaeism in this, because it denotes a very, very heavy dose of a fixture, a mental fixture with the material. What's the material way the kids are getting the presents? I can tell you, honestly, every Santa gift I've ever given my kid, that is not a gift from me. That is a gift from the patron saint of children, really and truly. So there's a preoccupation, a Manichaean, body-hating preoccupation with, well, how did it get there? It's like, okay, that's actually the least interesting part to a Christian mind, how it got there. This gift is not from me.
My computer's going to die. Just keep talking.
Okay. I mean this really and truly. So parish orphans out there, it's very, very important that you understand how literally I mean. We buy our kids at least one or two kind of big presents from Steph and me every year that are separate from the Santa gift, because that really is a gift through the mediation of us from the patron saint of little children. And once you get your mind around the fact that we mean this literally, every one of those Santa gifts are actually on his behalf, we wouldn't take credit for it any more than you would if you bought a gift for dad at the request of your dad. Then all of a sudden it becomes clearer. Oh, yeah, this is a pre with like the delivery. Who delivered this gift? FedEx or USPS? It's to me, it's no more interesting than that. To kids, it is, and that's what I think throws everybody off. And even some harm can be done if you continue to lie to your kids when they're 8, 9, 10 about USPS delivered this instead of FedEx, which is all we're talking about here. We're debate all this debate. People get really mad on the internet and on Twitter about Santa Claus, about the delivery system. So I think with a proper Catholic informed understanding of this, which is not Manichaean, it's not Puritan, it's not Calvinist, and it's not materialist reductionist, you're like, look, really what's at issue here is who this gift is from, and it's from the patron saint of little children. Of course, Protestants aren't going to understand this, right? Of course, they're not going to understand the agency of gifting from a guy who they believe is dead. We Catholics know Saint Nick is still alive. It's a canonized fact. He's still alive. Whether or not he traveled to the home and NORAD had it right when he was over Cleveland is not central to the question. And you can hedge with the mental reservation. Hey, look at what NORAD says. That's not a lie. NORAD did say that. And I'm going to do it in 9 days.
Well, I don't know what I'll do when I have kids, but on this side of the picture, it seems to be a tremendous amount of effort and risk that doesn't really have any upside to me. So at least now, I'll probably not tell them. So I'll just have to make sure that my kids don't mingle with your kids. It'd really just be Penny, I think, by the time that I have children old enough to go Richard Dawkinsing around your house saying, that's not real, that's not real.
Also, life is shit. That's what to be an anti-Santa, you have to always follow it up with like, life is shit, Isn't it a lie to be like, dude, this all ends in terrible, grim death. I mean, that is the feel of the preponderance of the anti-Santa. It's been strange to watch because even in the very skeptical, sarcastic 90s, everyone was like, come on, dude. Everyone was still Catholic on Santa. Yeah. And then the non-denominational evangelicals really preponderated sometime in the early 2000s. And now everyone's like, not Catholic on this anymore. Not a Saint Nicker.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's that's not how I would approach it with any kind of Manichaeism or nihilism. It would just be they wouldn't know that there was a difference. They wouldn't know what they were missing because I just wouldn't. Nothing would be taken because nothing would have been presented. I'd probably still give my kids gifts on Christmas because I think we should take as many excuses as possible to celebrate and to be joyful. And the birth of Christ is a great one for that, obviously.
Yeah, it's how you live your life. You're always looking for excuses to be, or not excuses, for reasons to be truly happy. I just think once you're like, okay, this informs a huge distinction, the distinction between lightning and the lightning bug, a massive one. If I tell my kid, hey, see that gift there, wrapped with like Santa Claus paper, that's from me, sport. I got that for you, but pretend it's from Santa. So you're telling the truth, not using the mental reservation. He's going to be like, okay, cool. Thanks for the extra present, Dad. Whereas me with the mental reservation, the utility, since you asked about this at the beginning, is now that young Olivia Magdalene knows, she's still like, oh, this is the Santa gift. This is the gift from Saint Nick. Like, now that she knows, the payload delivery is not actually a sleigh and magical horses or whatever, or like goats, whatever, reindeer, beasts that deliver Santa, and he like breaks and enters into our home. She knows that payload is not the means, the instrumentality by which she got the gift from Saint Nick, but she now, because of that mental reservation, she's a grunt. And you know, Maggie's very precocious. It's like talking to a 18-year-old. When you're talking to Maggie, she's about to be 13. She's like, no harm done. And she was asking me yesterday, she's like, why do you think you were so different when you found out, Dad? I was like, well, because I didn't have the care taken to be like, by the way, there is no mental reserve. I've never mentally reserved anything when I'm teaching you about Christ, the Trinity, the Eucharist, transubstantiation. I've labored to tell you how historically true this all is. The Shroud of Turin, I was taught basically that was a mental reservation. And I'm like, oh no, it's not. It's utterly historical. So when your kids see how much you've labored not to lie to them, you know, and to like, okay, once they're 8, you're dealing with this in a more forensic way than when they're 5. Then they're like, oh yeah, you were careful with that. Then you can reassure them, no, I did none of this with Jesus, the life of Jesus, or the Christology, continuing Christology of Jesus, or the ecclesiology of the church. All this is literal,
okay,
as far as I know.
But when you teach your child about the church's teachings, no performance or jocund lies or mental reservations are required to emphasize the importance or to transmit the knowledge. And so, given that the truths of Nicholas of Myra and Arianism and all these things are of less importance than the truths of the Trinity and transubstantiation and so on, it seems that the actual, if we were to do the algebra and cross out the same variables on either side, the actual utility is not, the sales funnel does result in pedagogical increase, but rather it's cozy, it's magical, it's fun. And if I were to then say, okay, cozy, magical fun on just like good cheer, good storytelling, good cultural storytelling on one side of the scale, and on the other side of the scale is either a neutral outcome, like what Maggie thankfully had, or a potentially negative outcome, which I think contributed to my atheism and potentially even to your agnosticism. Absolutely worthless risk to take.
Well, it should mean something that I'm saying. No, this I would say atheism. But I always tell people I was an atheist by my confirmation in 8th grade, and fourth grade was a landmark year for me. I shared a story about like I refused to believe in this little leprechaun in Mrs. Coates's class who I had a crush on in 2nd grade, and I was always a bit of a skeptic. So like Lisa Simpson reading Junior Skeptic magazine, having a subscription to that. I was always a skeptic, but I did buy into Santa, and I did go for that one big lie, and I was outright lied to, even upon explicit requests as a a bright kid. I was, mom and dad, is this you? And to be like, no, it's definitely not. Like, you can't do that with your bright fourth, fifth grader. You can't do that, people. I'm out there saying that. But for 5, 6, 7, 8, if they're not so discerning, as long as they're enjoying it, there is self-evident utility is such a weak argument for or against anything, because like most Catholics also don't understand this. This is a kind of throwaway point. Thomas talks about the goods, the different kinds of goods. There are goods of adultery, right? And again, the Manichaean Catholic, not you, Nick, but the Manichaeans are like, no, you can't say that. No, there are goods. It's called the first principle of practical reason in Aquinas. Do the good, avoid the evil. The Thomistic psychology is really specific that, like, well, if there are no goods in adultery, no one would ever do it.
Same thing with Ron. That's why I've said that before.
There are goods in suicide.
Yeah.
But, yeah, there are goods in suicide. People feel like this will be it doesn't mean there's enough good to get them over the hump, right, of the first principle of practical reason. But people freak out. They don't understand. That's how utility is. Utility just means, are there any goods in this? And it's like, well, yeah, there's utility on all sides of everything. This is why consequentialism is a morally ridiculous argument, among the fact that it's just false. But yeah, to say, oh, well, there's comfort. They're part of the cultus. It's a Christian cultus. They get to be part of some cultural myth. That's good. It is the myth of Saint Nick. People can't, might not be perfectly told the perfectly Catholic way, but I would also say there's real utility in even having all these pagans we live with having this stupid Toyota-thon. I say that's good too. I mean, this is one of the last standing remnants of Christian cultural myth in Western civilization. I'm hard for that point. Same thing with like wedding rings. Yeah, most of these people, I live with a bunch of Baptists. Half of them are like divorced. But the wedding ring, even though it's cheap on a lot of their fingers, the way they wear it, it's still a really important Catholic leitmotif. And I'm happy that it's preponderated the way it has. St. Nicholas is still a huge figure. He's partly misfigured, but he's still a huge figure in American culture this time of the year, and I'm here for it. I love it, and you don't have to lie. And yeah, I hope I've given people some tools to today, at least if you are interested in doing this, because there's real value in being with the culture the few times we're allowed to, not being a weirdo that's like cloistered. The few times we're allowed to, Santa's a great opportunity to do it. You could do it, no harm done. You just have to distinguish. You have to put in extra hours, which is what parents, especially fathers, are called to do anyway. And a lot of us didn't have those extra hours put in all these ways. In lots of ways I did, but this is one of those ways I did not have the extra fathering of like, look, don't apply this to Jesus. This is not a cultural myth at all. There are no mental reservations. I needed that done. I'm just saying I'm like you, Nick, and I've extra guarded against it.
Well,
it's good though.
So what do you want for Christmas?
So we're doing our Santa list soon. I do strongly agree that if it ever comes to one of the brighter elder kids being like, Dad, I think that you're delivering the presents. Are you, aren't you? You just have to, the jig is up.
What if they don't even know that enough to ask that, but they say, is this you?
As a young person, wow. So I had a call planned and it turned 12. Like 2 seconds later, this person called. Promptness is uncouth, people.
Stop being on time.
It's uncivilized. Arrive fashionably late. Straight promptness. That I literally watched my clock turn 12, and then I was wondering if this would happen. Holy cow! Be civilized, people. Be 5 to 10 minutes late, like a person. Let me text this person. We'll get off, but That's a tough question. You mean if the 5-year-old says, "Is it you?" That I would probably, if it's a 5-year-old and I know there's not going to be de rigueur follow up, I would say, "Is Saint Nick me?" No, I am not Saint. I am not Saint Nicholas.
So Jesuit.
Classic mental
So
reservation.
Jesuit.
It's not Jesuit. Okay, Nick thinks I'm Saint Nick. Everybody.
That's even more Jesuit.
No. And now if they said no, give me 5, bro. 5. I have a Canadian caller. I wonder if that like atomic level of promptness is a Canadian thing. I mean that was insane. I'm speaking of scarring. That's mentally scarring. It was like 12. No, you can never tell a lie, which involves an actus reus and a culpable mens rea. I don't want people saying like Nick's a baller, Tim's for lying. Like I am a truther. You cannot tell a strict lie. But if someone says, "Dad, are you Saint Nick?" I'd say, I am absolutely not Saint Nicholas of Myra, who's this person that you're talking about. If they say, "Did these gifts arrive by sleigh?" which no 5-year-old has ever said because they just buy the movies because you've shown them like 20. You say, look, what I would say is, were you watching Elf, Fred Claus, Christmas Story? Were you watching all those? I'd rather let them tell you when they're young, because they don't ask follow. That's what I'm telling you, Nick. Even a bright 5-year-old does not dig. And you're saying, well, this accrues against you. This militates against you, Tim, because they're trusting you so much. But it's a cultural myth, and you use mental reservation, and you never lie. And you do have to do it carefully. And when you tell them all of this stuff. You show them this show the day they find out.
All right. Well, that was thorough.
Yeah, it was good, right?
Yeah. We're still friends.
Because, I mean, there are going to be people on either side of this. I'll say this. Last hedge thing. I do think the concern that you have and that others harbor is less ridiculous than I did when in the late 90s, and even I was like an old teen, all Catholics celebrated Santa, and a lot of evangelicals were popularizing not. I then just mocked it. Like, this is so Protestant and Manichaean. I do get more why. And that's weird that I didn't get it a little more then, because I always told people a lot of my atheism, as a young man, accrued to the way that Santa was dealt with. But I also knew that there was a tactful way to do it, even though I might not have known what a mental reservation was in the late 90s. So I give it more heed, and I pay it more. I've even paid it more heed and more concern and more scruple over the last 10 years. And like I say, I was less careful about it with the older kids, and they're doing fine. So that's it. I won't say any more. Oh, by the way, would you just, as a parting shot, explain?
Yeah, because I did see a comment.
Seamask will return to a 4-man format.
Yeah, because I saw a comment about this. We're not slowly killing off our cast members. This is not. Elliot is on to other projects. It was a totally amicable transition. He just let us know, like, hey, he's got a lot on his plate. He's got a lot going on. He just released a book, and he's doing a lot of coaching stuff, so he couldn't dedicate the time to it. We will have him back on in the future. He's always welcome, and there will be shows.
We promise.
Yeah, and there will totally be shows that we should collaborate on. Will was just indisposed today. Will's not going anywhere.
And Dr. Mike, the swap out for you and Dr. Mike Robillard, totally amicable, and he too will appear at some point on a new show. At some point, we have a replacement for Elliot that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, very excited for that one.
We'll announce that. We'll have a show in person with him. Yeah, that'll be really fun.
2 Fridays from now, I think. 3 Fridays from now.
3 Fridays.
We'll be introducing our intrepid new co-host. But I know it sounds like cope to be like, everything was amicable, I promise, nobody's mad, but like, it's legitimately true. And like, adult men can collaborate and stop collaborating without like bitchy gay drama, and that's what happened. So,
well, I get that people are like, look, you have outside of a week after Tim, you left Taylor Marshall, you've never ever like collaborated again. That looks weird. Like that looks weird. Yeah, and I've never told people like I don't, because this is kind of what we're talking about with Saint Nick. I never lie. I'm never like, yeah, it's there's weirdness there without going into it more. So this is the contrast. This is exactly what I'm saying to do with Saint Nick. There's no weirdness with Elliot or Mike. We will do a show once it's the four of us, me, Will, you, and Elliot's replacement. We will do a show with a 2 CMASC alum where we will have all 6 of us on together, and that will prove it in folks' mind, because we're starting to get the questions about it. But it's good we address.
Yeah.
Cool.
Merry Christmas, Timothy.
Merry Christmas, Nicholas. And you know, it's about to turn 12:05 on the dot, and then it's going to be like the second it turns 12:05. Since I said give me 5, it'll be like, okay, 5 minutes.
So sorry, Nate.
Sorry, 300 seconds. All right,
guys.
God bless you all.